The morning that followed his fateful meeting with Dunya and Pulcheria Alexandrovna had a sobering effect on Pyotr Petrovitch. To his exceedingly great annoyance, he had little by little been compelled to accept as an unalterable fait accompli the very thing which only the previous day had seemed an event belonging almost to the realms of fantasy, and which, although it had taken place, still seemed impossible to him. All night a black serpent of wounded self-esteem had eaten at his heart. The first thing Pyotr Petrovitch did upon getting out of bed was to take a look in the mirror. He was afraid he might have had an attack of jaundice overnight. From this point of view all was, however, still satisfactory for the moment, and having taken a look at his nobly virtuous, white and, of late, somewhat portly features, Pyotr Petrovitch actually felt somewhat consoled for a moment, in the fullest conviction that he would be able to find himself a wife somewhere else, and perhaps a better one too. But at once came to his senses and spat to one side with energy, bringing a silent but sarcastic smile to the face of his young friend and room companion, Andrei Semyonovitch Lebeziatnikov. Pyotr Petrovitch noticed this smile, and he immediately put it down as a black mark against his young friend. He had been putting down a good many black marks against him recently. His rage grew doubly intense when he suddenly realized that he ought not to have told Andrei Semyonovitch about the results of last night's meeting. That was the second mistake he had made yesterday in the heat of the moment, under the sway of his own over-expansiveness and irritation. And then all throughout this morning, as if by special design, one disagreeable event had followed another. Even at the Senate, a setback had awaited him in connection with the matter he was petitioning for there. He was particularly irritated by the owner of the apartment he had rented with a view to his impending marriage, which had been brightened up at his own expense. This owner, a German craftsman who had made a lot of money, would not on any account agree to violate the terms of the contract that had just been signed, and demanded the full forfeit prescribed therein, in spite of the fact that Pyotr Petrovitch was returning the apartment to him in a state of virtual redecoration. Things were exactly the same in the furniture store, where the staff refused to give him back 1 single rouble of the deposit he had paid on the furniture that he had purchased, but had not yet been moved into the apartment. "I'm not getting married just for the sake of the furniture," Pyotr Petrovitch said to himself, grinding his teeth. And at the same time a desperate hope fleeted through his mind once more. Is the situation really so irrevocably lost and hopeless? Can I really not have another try? The thought of Dunya sent another seductive twinge to his heart. In agony he endured this moment, and it was an undeniable fact that it had been impossible for him to do away with Raskolnikov right there and then by simply stating the desire. Pyotr Petrovitch would have lost no time in stating it. I also went wrong in not giving them any money, he thought, as he returned in low spirits to Lebeziatnikov's closet of a room. Why was I such a Jew? The devil take it! It wasn't even a real saving. I planned to make their lives a misery, lead them to the point where they'd view me as their providence, and see what they've gone and done. Confound it! No, if to cover this, the whole visit, I'd have given them, say, 1,500 roubles for the trousseau and the presents and all those various little boxes, toilet cases, cornelians, dress materials, all that frilly rubbish they could have bought at Knopp's or the English shop. The whole thing would have been neater and more secure. They wouldn't have been able to refuse me so easily then. They're the sort of people who would have thought it their duty to give back both presents and money in such a situation, and it would have been difficult for them to do that. It would have broken their hearts, and their consciences would have bothered them. How can we drive away a man who's been so generous to us, and tactful about it too? Damn, I slipped up there. Beginning to grind his teeth again, Pyotr Petrovitch admitted that he had been a fool. but only to himself, of course. Reaching this conclusion, he went home twice as irritated and enraged as he had been on setting out. The preparations for the funeral snacks in Katerina Ivanovna's room aroused a mild curiosity in him. The previous day he had heard a few things about this promised event. He even thought he remembered having been invited to it, but because of his own troubles nothing else had engaged his attention. Making haste to inquire about it from Mrs. Lippwasel, who was busying herself with the laying of the table in the absence of Katerina Ivanovna, who was at the cemetery, he had discovered that the event was to be a grand one. Nearly all the lodgers had been invited, even those whom the deceased had not known. That even Andrei Semyonovitch Lebeznatnikov had been invited, in spite of his earlier quarrel with Katerina Ivanovna. And that to cap it all, he himself, Pyotr Petrovitch, had not only been invited, was actually expected with the greatest impatience, being very nearly the most important lodger and the guest of them all. Amalia Ivanovna had also been invited as a guest of honour, in spite of all the earlier unpleasantness, was now for that reason bustling about in her role of landlady, almost deriving pleasure from it. She was, moreover, dressed up to the nines, in mourning perhaps, but nevertheless in mourning that was new and made of silk, taking pride in it. All this evidence and information had given Pyotr Petrovitch a certain idea. It was in the state of some reflection that he entered his room, or rather the room of Andrei Semyonovitch Lebeznatnikov. The fact was, he had also discovered that among those invited was Raskolnikov. For some reason, Andrei Semyonovitch had been at home all that morning. To this gentleman Pyotr Petrovitch had formed a strange, yet in part quite natural relation. Pyotr Petrovitch despised and hated him, beyond all measure, and had done so from the day he had moved in with him, yet at the same time he seemed a little apprehensive of him. On arriving in St. Petersburg, he had put up at his lodgings not merely out of stingy thrift, though that had probably been his main motive. There had been other motive too. Back in the provinces, he had heard of Andrei Semyonovitch, his former pupil, as one of the foremost young progressives, who had even played a significant role in certain curious and legendary circles. Pyotr Petrovitch had been struck by this. For these powerful, omniscient circles, with their contempt for everyone and accusations against all and sundry, had long inspired Pyotr Petrovitch with a peculiar, though wholly vague, sense of terror. It went without saying that back there in the provinces he'd been unable to form even an approximate conception of what it was all about. He had heard, like everyone else, that particularly in St. Petersburg there were to be found progressives, nihilists, public accusers, and so on and so forth, but, like many people, he tended to exaggerate and distort the sense and significance of these labels to the point of the absurd. For several years now he had feared, more than anything else, being made the victim of a public accusation. This was the principal reason for his constant exaggerated sense of anxiety, especially when he had dreamt of moving his practice to St. Petersburg. In this respect he was, as they say, a frit, in the way small children sometimes are. Some years earlier, in the provinces, when he had only just been beginning to organise his career, he had encountered 2 cases involving the merciless public accusation and exposure of rather important persons in local government, to whom he had been attached, and who had afforded him official protection. One of these cases had ended in a particularly scandalous manner for the man who had been accused, and the other had very nearly ended in outright disaster. This was why Pyotr Petrovitch had made it his object to discover, as soon as he arrived in St. Petersburg, what it was all about, and, if necessary, to get ahead of the game and curry favour with the younger generation. In this matter he had placed his reliance upon Andrei Semyonovitch, and had, for his visit to Raskolnikov, for example, already learned how to roll off certain phrases in parrot fashion. Of course, he had quickly perceived that Andrei Semyonovitch was an extremely vulgar and simple-minded little man. But this in no way altered Pyotr Petrovitch's opinion or made him feel any the more confident. Even had he gained the certainty that all progressives were the same little idiots, his anxiety would not have been laid to rest. If you were to be quite honest, none of these theories, ideas, and systems, with which Andrei Semyonovitch positively assailed him, was of the slightest interest to him. He had his own personal motive. All he wished to do was to ascertain as quickly as possible what was going on here, whether these people had any power or not, and whether he personally had any reason to be afraid of them. If he was to undertake a certain project, would they accuse him or would they not? And if so, what would they accuse him of? And why particularly now? Nor was that all. Might it not be possible for him to ingratiate himself with them, and then pull a fast one on them, if they really were so powerful? Did he, or did he not need to do this? Might he not, for example, further his career a little at their expense? In short, there were hundreds of questions waiting to be answered. This Andrei Semyonovitch was a wasted and scrofulous individual, small in stature, employed in some civil service department or other. He was blond to the point of strangeness, and sported a pair of mutton-chop whiskers, of which he was very proud. On top of all this, he almost constantly suffered from an infection in both eyes. As for his heart, he was rather soft, but he spoke in a thoroughly self-confident and sometimes positively overbearing manner which, when one compared it with his pathetic appearance, nearly always sounded ridiculous. At Amalia Ivanovna's he was, however, considered one of the more distinguished residents. That is to say, he did not indulge in drinking, and always paid his rent on time. In spite of all these qualities, Andrei Semyonovitch really was rather stupid. He adhered to the cause of progress and our younger generations as a kind of enthusiastic pastime. He was one of that countless and multifarious legion of vulgar persons, sickly abortions and half-educated petty tyrants, who like a flash attach themselves to those current ideas that are most fashionable, in order, again like a flash, to vulgarise them, caricaturing the very cause they seek to serve, sometimes with great genuineness. In spite of his being very good-natured, Lebeznatnikov was, however, also beginning to tire of his room companion and former tutor Pyotr Petrovitch. This state of affairs had come about mutually and seemingly by chance. Andrei Semyonovitch might be rather simple-minded, but even so he had begun to realise that Pyotr Petrovitch was deceiving him and viewed him with secret contempt, and that this fellow was the wrong sort altogether. He had attempted to explain to him the system of Fourier and the theory of Darwin, but Pyotr Petrovitch had, especially of late, begun to listen with just a shade too much sarcasm, and had even, most recently, begun to respond with abuse. The truth of the matter was that his instincts had begun to tell him that Lebeznatnikov was not only a vulgar and stupid little man, but was also possibly a liar, and that he had no significant connections whatsoever, even within his own circle, but had only heard a few things at third hand. Not only that, it was probable that he did not even have a decent grasp of his own propaganda, for he said far too many contradictory things, and what kind of public accuser would he make? We should incidentally observe in passing that during the last week and a half Pyotr Petrovitch had, particularly in the first few days, gladly accepted from Andrei Semyonovitch some very strange items of praise. That is to say, he had made no objection and had remained silent when, for example, Andrei Semyonovitch had ascribed to him a readiness to assist the founding of a new and soon-to-be established commune somewhere in Menshanskaya Street. Or, for example, not to stand in Dunya's way if, right from the first month of their marriage, she decided to take a lover. Or not to have his children baptized. And so on and so forth, all of it along the same lines. Pyotr Petrovitch, true to form, did not object to having such qualities ascribed to him, allowed himself to be praised, even in this manner. So pleasant to him was any form of praise. Pyotr Petrovitch, who for certain reasons of his own had that morning cashed some 5% bonds, was sitting at the table counting packets of credit and serial notes. Andrei Semyonovitch, who practically never had any money, was pacing about the room and doing his best to eye all these packets indifferently, even with disdain. Pyotr Petrovitch, for example, would never for one moment have believed that Andrei Semyonovitch was really capable of viewing such a large amount of money with indifference. Andrei Semyonovitch, for his part, reflected bitterly that Pyotr Petrovitch really was, in all probability, capable of thinking about him in this light, and was possibly even glad of the chance to tease and tickle his young friend with these laid-out piles of banknotes in order to remind him of his insignificance and the difference that existed between them. On this occasion he found Pyotr Petrovitch quite extraordinarily irritable and inattentive, in spite of the fact that he, Andrei Semyonovitch, had just begun to expand on his favourite theme, the establishment of a new and special form of commune. The brief retorts and observations that escaped from Pyotr Petrovitch in the intervals between his clicking of the beads on the abacus were redolent of the most undisguised and intentionally discourteous mockery. But the humane Andrei Semyonovitch ascribed Pyotr Petrovitch's mood to his break with Dunya of the evening before, and burned with eagerness to bring the conversation round to that subject as soon as possible. He had something progressive and propagandistic to say on that account, something that might console his estimable friend, and would undoubtedly be of benefit to his further development. "What's this funeral banquet they're organising at that widow's place?" Pyotr Petrovitch suddenly asked, interrupting Andrei Semyonovitch just as he was coming to the most interesting part. "You mean you don't know? But I spoke to you on that theme yesterday, developing my theory about all those rituals. And I mean, she invited you too, so I heard. You yourself spoke to her yesterday." "I certainly never expected that destitute fool of a woman would spend all the money she got from that other fool, Raskolnikov, on a funeral banquet. I was positively astonished just now as I walked past. Such preparations are going on there. They even have wines. People have been invited. The devil only knows what sort of an affair it's going to be," Pyotr Petrovitch continued, probing the matter and pursuing the conversation apparently with some ulterior motive. "What? You say I've been invited too?" he added suddenly, raising his head. "When was that? I don't remember it. In any case, I shan't go. What business have I there? I talked with her only yesterday in passing about the possibility of her receiving a year's salary at the destitute widow of a civil servant in the form of extraordinary allowance. Perhaps that's why she's invited me. Ha ha ha!" "I'm not going either," Lebeziatnikov said. "I don't wonder. After dealing out a personal thrashing like that, I can imagine you might feel too ashamed." "Who dealt out a thrashing? To whom?" Lebeziatnikov said, thrown suddenly into a flutter, even blushing. "Why, you did. To Katerina Ivanovna, about a month ago. I mean, I heard about it, sir, yesterday, sir. So that's the sort of thing those convictions of yours lead you to do. And the woman question didn't fare very well either, did it? Ha ha!" "It's all nonsense and slander," Lebeziatnikov said, flaring up. He was constantly afraid of anyone mentioning this episode. "It wasn't like that at all. It was quite different. What you heard is wrong. It's just idle gossip. I was simply defending myself that time. It was she who attacked me. She used her fingernails. She pulled out the whole of my side whiskers. I would hope that it's permissible for anyone to defend his or her person. Quite apart from the fact that I will not allow anyone to treat me with violence on principle, because it more or less amounts to despotism. What should I have done? Just stood there and let her carry on? I merely pushed her away, that's all. Ha 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 ha! Lucien continued to mock with angry malice. You're just picking on me because you're annoyed and angry. It's all nonsense. It has not the slightest connection with the woman question. You got hold of the wrong end of the stick. At first I thought that if it were accepted that a woman is a man's equal in everything, even in strength, which people are already claiming is so, then there ought to be equality in this case too. Of course, I reasoned afterwards that such a question ought in essence never to arise, because fights ought never to arise, because in the society of the future fighting will be unthinkable, and because in the last analysis it's quite strange to look for equality in fighting. I'm not so stupid, though of course fighting does still exist. That's to say, it won't exist in the future, but for the present it does. Oh, the devil confound it, you're getting me quite confused. That unpleasant incident has nothing to do with my not going to the funeral banquet. I'm staying away out of principle, so as to have no part in the vile superstition of funeral banquets. That's what. Actually, I might even have gone just to laugh at the whole business. But there aren't going to be any priests there, worse luck. If there were to be priests, I'd most certainly have gone. You mean you'd sit down to other people's hospitality and at the same time spit on it, on those who've invited you? Is that what you're saying? No, it has nothing to do with spitting. It's more a question of making a protest. I'd be doing it with the aim of being useful. I might indirectly assist the cause of education and propaganda. Everyone has a duty to spread education and propaganda, and the more bluntly the better, if you ask me. I might implant an idea, a seed. From that seed something real might grow. How would I be offending them? They might get offended initially, but then they'd see for themselves I'd done them a good deed. It's like what happened with Terebieva. She's a member of our commune just now, recently, when she left her family and gave herself to a fellow. They said she'd acted too crassly in writing to her mother, saying she didn't want to live among prejudice any more, was entering into a citizen's marriage, that she ought to have spared her parents' feelings, been more gentle with them in her letter. But in my opinion, that's all rubbish. Being gentle would have been quite the wrong thing. On the contrary, in a case like that, too, what she needed to do was make a protest. Or look at Varence. She'd lived with her husband for 7 years, but she abandoned her 2 children, severed her relations with her husband in one go, writing to him, I have come to the realization that I cannot be happy with you. I will never forgive you for having kept me from the truth and concealing from me that there exists another ordering of society embodied in the commune. I've recently learned all this from a man of generous ideals, to whom I have given myself. And together with him I am settling down in a commune. I tell you this directly, as I consider it to be ignoble to deceive you. You may do as you think fit. Do not suppose you can make me come back. You are too late. I want to be happy. Now, that's the way to write a letter of that kind. Is this the Terebieva you've told me the other day was in the middle of her 3rd citizen's marriage? Oh, it's only her 2nd, if one takes a correct view of the matter. But even if it were her 4th or her 15th, what does it matter? That's all just a lot of nonsense. I never felt so sorry that my father and mother are dead as I do now. Sometimes I've even dreamt of how, if they'd been alive still, I'd have given them a thumping great protest to think about. I'd have let them down on purpose, and it wouldn't have been just a question of my being self-supporting. Confound it, I'd have shown them. I'd have surprised them all right. It really is too bad I don't have anyone. No one to surprise, eh? Well, have it as you will, Pyotr Petrovitch said, interrupting. But tell me, you know the dead man's daughter, the skinny creature, don't you? Are they really true, the things people say about her? What can I say? In my opinion, that is, in my own personal opinion, she's in the most normal situation a woman can find herself in. Why not? To say, distinguons. In the way society is ordered at present, it is, of course, not quite a normal one, because it's been compelled upon her, but in the future order of society it will be completely normal, as it will be freely chosen. Why, even now, she's been within her rights. She's suffered, and that has been her reserve, her capital, as it were, of which she has a perfect right to dispose as she pleases. Of course, in the society of the future, those sorts of reserves won't be necessary, but her role will be defined in a different sense, determined rationally and harmoniously. As for Sofya Semyonovna's personal actions, I regard them as an energetic and wholehearted protest against the arrangements of society, and I respect her profoundly for it. As I watch her, I even rejoice. The way I heard it was that you were the person who got her kicked out of those rooms. Lebeziatnikov grew positively enraged. That's another piece of idle gossip, he howled. That's not at all the way it happened. It's simply not true. It was Katerina Ivanovna who made all that up because she didn't understand. And I never tried to endear myself to Sofya Semyonovna. All I did was quite simply try to educate her, completely disinterestedly, trying to arouse her to protest. Protest was all I was after. And in any case, Sofya Semyonovna couldn't have stayed in these rooms. What did you do? Ask her to go and live in that commune? You're still trying to make a fool of me, and rather unsuccessfully, may I add. You don't understand. Roles like that don't exist in a commune. Communes are set up precisely in order to avoid there being roles like that. In a commune, a role like that would entirely alter its current significance. Things that seem stupid here become intelligent there. And what might seem unnatural here, the way things are currently, become entirely natural there. Everything depends on a man's surroundings and environment. Everything proceeds from the environment, and a man is nothing on his own. I'm still on good terms with Sofya Semyonovna even now, which may serve as proof to you that she's never considered me her enemy or molester. Yes, I'm trying to coax her to join the commune now, but from quite different motives. And what do you find so amusing about it? We're trying to establish our own commune, which is of a special kind and is based much more broadly than those that have existed previously. We've taken our convictions further. There's more that we reject. If Dobrulyubov were to come back from the grave, I'd have a few things to tell him, and if Belinsky were to, I'd roll right over him. But meanwhile, I'm continuing to educate Sofya Semyonovna, and what a noble character she has. Oh, so you're profiting from her noble character too, eh? No, absolutely not. On the contrary. Ah, it's on the contrary now, is it? Now you're talking. But I assure you it is so. Why would I try to conceal it from you? Be so good as to tell me. On the contrary, I even find it strange myself. She's so intensely, so timorously chaste and modest with me. And you, of course, are trying to educate her, trying to demonstrate to her that all that modesty is nonsense. Oh, absolutely not, absolutely not. Oh, what a crass, what a downright stupid, if you'll forgive me, conception you have of the word education. You don't understand. Oh, Lord, how unready you are. We are seeking the liberation of woman, yet you can only think of one thing. Leaving aside entirely the question of chastity and female modesty as things useless in themselves, and even based on downright prejudice, I am perfectly willing to tolerate her chaste behaviour with me because it expresses the whole of her freedom, the whole of her right. Naturally, if she were to say to me, I want to possess you, I'd consider myself very fortunate, for I fancy the girl quite a lot. But for the present at least, it goes without saying that no one has treated her more courteously and considerately, or with more respect for her dignity, than I. I wait and hope. That is all. What you ought to do is give her some sort of present. I'll wager you've never even thought of doing that. I told you you don't understand. It's true that that's the sort of position she's in, but that's another matter, quite another matter. You simply have contempt for her. In apprehending a phenomenon that you mistakenly consider to be worthy of contempt, you deny a human creature a human response. You don't know what a character she has. The only thing that vexes me is that she seems to have stopped reading altogether of late and doesn't borrow books from me any more. She used to, you know. The other thing that's a pity is that for all her energy and her determination to register a protest, which she's demonstrated to me once, she still doesn't seem to have very much self-dependence or independence, if you know what I mean. She's rather short on that kind of negation that's required if one's to throw off certain prejudices and stupidities. But even in spite of that, she has an excellent grasp of certain questions. She's developed a marvellous grasp, for example, of the question concerning the kissing of hands. That's to say, that a man insults a woman and doesn't treat her as an equal if he kisses her hand. And that matter was a subject of debate among us, and I told her about it immediately. She was also very interested when I described to her the workers' cooperatives in France. Just now I'm telling her about the question concerning the free access to rooms in the society of the future. And what might that be? And we had a debate recently on the question of whether one member of the commune has a right to walk into the room of another member, whether it's a man or a woman, at any time of day or night. Well, it was decided that they do. Yes, and at the very moment when he or she is engaged in some pressing personal necessity. At this, Andrei Semyonovitch really lost his temper. You're still going on about that? That's all you want to talk about, those damn necessities? He shouted with hatred. Confound it! I shall never forgive myself for having mentioned those damn necessities in the course of explaining the system to you, before you were ready for it. The devil take it! It's invariably a stumbling block for your sort of person, and what's even worse, you make it into the subject of jokes before you've had any idea what it's all about. I mean, it's as though you were proud of it or something. Confound it, I've said time and time again that the only way that question can be explained to newcomers is right at the end, when they've been won over to the system, when they've completed their education and are on the right path. And what, tell me please, is so shameful and contemptible, even in cesspools? I'd be the first to go and clean out any cesspool you'd care to name. It doesn't even involve any self-sacrifice. It's simply work, a noble activity that is socially useful and is far and away superior to the activity of any Raphael or Pushkin, for the simple reason that it's more useful. And add more noble, ha ha! What do you mean, more noble? I don't understand expressions like that when they're used to describe human activity. More noble, more magnanimous. All that's just absurd rubbish, old prejudice-ridden words that I reject. All that is useful to mankind is noble. That's the only word I understand. Useful. Snigger all you like, but it is so. Pyotr Petrovitch had not laughed so much for a long time. By now he had finished counting the money and had stuffed it away. For some reason, however, a portion of it remained on the table. This cesspool question had, all its vulgarity notwithstanding, served on a number of occasions now as a pretext for strife and dissension between Pyotr Petrovitch and his young friend. What was so stupid about the whole affair was that Andrei Semyonovitch really was angry. As for Luzin, he found it a convenient outlet for his frustration, and at the present moment felt a particular desire to make Lebeziatnikov angry. "You're simply aggressive and in a bad temper because of the rebuff you received yesterday," Lebeziatnikov burst out at last. Somehow, in spite of all his independence and protest, he did not dare to oppose Pyotr Petrovitch, and in general treated him with a kind of habitual deference that was a hangover from former years. "Look, I know what you can tell me," Pyotr Petrovitch said, interrupting with haughty irritation. "Can you do this for me? Or rather, tell me, sir, are you really on sufficiently intimate terms with this young female person that you could ask her, this very moment, to come in here, into this room? I think they've all come back from the cemetery now. I can hear feet walking about. I need to see her, the young person." "But why do you need to see her?" "Oh, because I do, sir, because I do. Today or tomorrow I shall be leaving here, and so I should like to tell her. But actually, you may as well stay here during our meeting. It'll probably be better that way. Otherwise, God knows what you may get into your head." "I won't get anything into my head. I was merely asking, that's all. And if you have some business to discuss with her, there's nothing easier than to ask her to come in. I'll go along there now, and you may be assured that I won't interfere." True enough. Some 5 minutes later, Lebeziatnikov returned with Sonia. She came in looking thoroughly astonished and, as usual, abashed. She was always abashed on such occasions, was very frightened of new people and new acquaintances, had been as a child, was even more so now. Pyotr Petrovitch greeted her kindly and politely, though with a slight touch of affable familiarity, suitable in Pyotr Petrovitch's view to a man as respected and of such elevated social standing as himself, when talking to a female person as youthful and in a certain sense interesting as she. He hastened to put her at her ease, and asked her to sit down at the table opposite him. Sonia sat down and looked around, at Lebeziatnikov, at the money that was lying on the table, and then suddenly back at Pyotr Petrovitch again. And after that she did not take her eyes off him, but kept staring at him, as though she were riveted to him. Lebeziatnikov made off towards the door. Pyotr Petrovitch stood up, motioned to Sonia to remain seated, and stopped Lebeziatnikov in the doorway. "Is that Raskolnikov fellow there? Has he come too?" he asked him in a whisper. "Raskolnikov? Yeah, what of it? Yes, he's there. He's only just walked in. I saw him. What about it?" "Well, in that case, I must make a special plea to you to remain here with us, and not leave me alone with this young lady. It's a trifling matter, but God knows what conclusions people may jump to. I don't want Raskolnikov to tell them about it in there. Do you understand what I'm talking about?" "Ha ha! I've got it, Lebeziatnikov said, suddenly seeing the point. "Yes, you have a right. I must say that in my own personal opinion I think you're getting unduly worried, but even so you do have a right. Very well, I should stay. I'll stand by the window here and won't interfere. In my opinion, you have a right." Pyotr Petrovitch returned to the sofa, sat down opposite Sonia, gave her a close look, and then suddenly assumed an air of extreme decorousness, which was even slightly stern, as if to say, "Now don't get any ideas, madam." Sonia's embarrassment was by now complete. "In the first place, Sofya Semyonovna, you must tender my excuses to your much-esteemed mother. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Katerina Ivanovna is your stepmother, isn't she?" Pyotr Petrovitch began, very decorously, but kindly enough for all that. It was plain that his intentions were most cordial. "That's right, sir. Yes, sir. She's my stepmother, sir," Sonia replied quickly and fearfully. "Well then, please tell her I am sorry that because of circumstances beyond my control, I find myself unable to attend the blinis, the funeral banquet, that is to say, at your lodgings, in spite of your mother's kind invitation." "Yes, sir. I'll tell her, sir." And Sonia hurriedly leapt up from her chair. "And that isn't all, my dear. There is more," Pyotr Petrovitch said, stopping her and smiling at her lack of sophistication and ignorance of social customs. "Dear Sofya Semyonovna, you little know me if you suppose that I would trouble a young lady such as yourself in person and ask you to come and see me about such an insignificant matter which concerns myself alone. No, I have another reason for wishing to see you." Sonia hurriedly sat down. The grey and rainbow-coloured banknotes, which had still not been cleared from the table, caught her attention again fleetingly, but she quickly averted her gaze from them and raised it to Pyotr Petrovitch. She suddenly felt that it was terribly improper for her, in particular, to look at someone else's money. She fixed her eyes on Pyotr Petrovitch's gold lorgnette, which he was holding in his left hand, and his large, massively and extremely handsome ring, with its yellow stone that adorned the middle finger of that hand. But then suddenly she averted her gaze from that too, and, no longer knowing where to look, ended up staring into Pyotr Petrovitch's eyes once more. After a pause that was even more decorous than his previous one, Pyotr Petrovitch said, "I had occasion yesterday to exchange a few words with Katerina Ivanovna, poor lady. Those few words were enough to apprise me of the fact that the condition she currently finds herself in is one of unnaturalness, if I may thus express it." "Yes, sir, one of unnaturalness, sir," Sonia hurried to agree. "Or, to put it more simply and straightforwardly, one of illness." "Yes, sir, more simply and straightforward. Yes, sir, she's ill." "Quite so. And so it is that from a sense of humanity and how shall I put it, compassion, I should like to do something to help her, in view of the inevitably unfortunate lot that awaits her. It would appear that the whole of this most destitute family now depends on you alone." "There's something I want to ask," Sonia said, standing up all of a sudden. "What did you say to her yesterday about the chance of her receiving a pension? Because yesterday she told me that you had undertaken to get her one. Is that true, sir?" "Certainly not, my dear. It's actually rather a silly thing for her to have said. All I did was hint at the possibility of her receiving some temporary assistance as the widow of a government employee deceased while employed in the service, as long as she has someone to pull the right strings for her. But it seems that your deceased parent hadn't actually been doing any work at all of late. In short, though there might have been some hope, it could only be of a most ephemeral nature, as in essence there is no entitlement to assistance in this case, and even possibly the reverse. Yet there she was, already thinking about a pension. The lady has some spirit." "Yes, sir, she has been thinking about a pension, because she's kind-hearted and easily taken in, and her kind-heartedness makes her believe all the things people tell her, and that's just the way she thinks. Yes, sir, you must forgive her, sir," Sonia said, and again got up to go. "But you haven't let me finish what I was about to say, my dear." "No, sir, I haven't," Sonia muttered. "Then please sit down." Sonia became terribly confused and sat down again for a third time. "In view of the position she's in, with unfortunate minors to look after, I should like, as I've already said, to do whatever I can, within the limit of my powers, in order to help her. But I must stress that it can only be within the limit of my powers, my dear. No more than that. It might, for example, be possible to organise a subscription fund for her, or, as it were, a lottery, or something of that nature. The sort of thing that is usually done by relatives, or at any rate by those who wish to help. It was this that I was anxious to tell you. That sort of thing would be perfectly possible, my dear." "Yes, very well, sir. God will thank you for this, sir," Sonia babbled, staring fixedly at Pyotr Petrovitch. "Possible, but we shall see about it later. Though we might make a start on it this very day. Let us meet this evening, my dear, talk it over, lay the groundwork, as it were. Come and see me at about 7. Andrei Semyonovitch, I hope, will also join us, but there is one thing I must make thoroughly clear in advance. It was in this connection that I troubled you, Sofya Semyonovna, in asking you to come here in person. You see, my dear, it is my opinion that it would be foolish, and indeed dangerous, to put money straight into Katerina Ivanovna's hands. As proof of this, I would cite the funeral banquet she is holding today, though she does not know where her next crust of bread is coming from, and she and her children do not even have proper shoes or anything. She has today purchased Jamaican rum, and even, it would appear, Madeira and coffee. I saw it as I was passing. Tomorrow the whole burden will descend upon your shoulders again, all the way to the last crust of bread. And that is absurd, my dear. And so it is in my personal view that the subscription fund must be organised in such a manner that the unfortunate widow should, as it were, know nothing about the money, and that you should perhaps be the only person who does. Do you think that makes sense? I don't know, sir. She's only doing this today, sir. It's once in her lifetime. She wanted so terribly to remember her husband and do something in his honour as a kind of memorial. And she's very intelligent, sir. But then again, it's as you wish, sir, and I will be very, very, very grateful to you, sir. They all will be, and God will be too, and the orphans, sir. Sonia left her sentence unfinished and burst into tears. Yes, my dear. Well, think about it. And now I should be glad if you'd accept, in the interest of your mother, an initial sum from me personally. It is the best that I can do. I must earnestly request that my name not be mentioned in connection with any of this. Here you are, my dear. Saddled as I am with myself with worries, this is all that I... And Pyotr Petrovitch carefully unfolded a 10-rouble banknote and handed it to Sonia. Sonia took it, blushed scarlet, leapt to her feet, muttered something and quickly said goodbye. Pyotr Petrovitch solemnly accompanied her to the door. At last she darted out of the room in a state of utter agitation and exhaustion, and returned to Katerina Ivanovna totally confused. Throughout the whole of this scene, Andrei Semyonovitch had either been standing by the window or wandering about the room, anxious not to interrupt the conversation, but when Sonia had left, he suddenly went up to Pyotr Petrovitch and held out his hand to him in solemn greeting. "I heard and saw it all," he said, laying particular emphasis on the latter word. "That was nobly, I mean to say humanely done. You were trying to avoid any scenes of gratitude, I could see that. And though I must confess to you that my principles forbid me to condone private charity, as not only does it fail radically to root out evil, but actually fuels it even more, even so, I cannot help admitting that I viewed what you did with satisfaction. Yes, it appeals to me." "Oh, don't talk such nonsense," Pyotr Petrovitch muttered in some agitation, giving Lebeziatnikov a strange look. "It isn't nonsense. A man who's been insulted and brought to the point of vexation as you were by yesterday's events, yet is still able to think of the misfortune of others. Such a man, sir, even though by his actions he is committing an error against society, is none the less worthy of respect. I must say I didn't expect it of you, Pyotr Petrovitch, particularly in view of your way of seeing the world. Oh, how your way of seeing the world stands in your path! How upset you are, for instance, by this rebuff you received yesterday," exclaimed the soft-hearted Andrei Semyonovitch, again experiencing a wave of intense sympathy for Pyotr Petrovitch. "Yet what use would that legal marriage have been to you, my good, kind Pyotr Petrovitch? What use would that marital legality have been to you? Well, chastise me if you wish, but I'm glad that it has not come about, and that you are free, that you are not yet lost to mankind. Glad. There, I've told you my opinion. Because I do not wish to wear horns and raise other men's children in one of those citizens' marriages of yours. That's the reason why legal marriage is necessary to me," Lutzin said, for want of a better reply. There was evidently something on his mind, something that was occupying all his attention. "Children? You're on to the subject of children, are you?" Andrei Semyonovitch said with a start, like a war horse hearing the martial trumpet. The question of children is a social one, and of the first importance, I agree, but it is a question that will be resolved differently in future. There are some who reject children altogether, as they do all that suggests the family. We shall speak of children later, but for the present let us get to grips with the horns. I will confess to you that I have a special weakness for this point. Horns, that loathsome hussar barrack room Pushkinian expression, will be quite unthinkable in the dictionary of the future. For what are horns? Oh, what a delusion! What horns? Why are they called horns? Such nonsense! They certainly won't exist in any citizen's marriage. Horns are simply the natural consequence of legal marriage, a corrective to it, as it were, a protest against it, so that in that sense at least they are in no way degrading. And if I should ever, supposing the absurd to be possible, enter into a legal marriage, I would be positively glad of your damnable horns. Then to my wife I would say, my dear, until now I have merely loved you, but now I respect you because you have succeeded in making a protest. You think that's funny, do you? That's because you're not strong enough to tear yourself away from your prejudices. The devil take it, of course I understand how unpleasant it can be when people play false in legal marriage, but I mean, that is simply the ignoble consequence of an ignoble institution, in which both partners are degraded. But when, on the other hand, horns are worn openly, as they are in a citizen's marriage, then they no longer exist. They're unthinkable, and actually lose the appellation of horns altogether. On the contrary, your wife will merely be demonstrating to you how much she respects you, considering you incapable of opposing her happiness, and so educated that you won't revenge yourself on her for taking a new husband. The devil take it, I sometimes imagine that if I were to be given away in marriage, if I were to enter upon marriage, whether a legal or a citizen's one, make no difference, I think I myself would get my wife a lover, if she took too long about finding one. My dear, I'd say to her, I love you, but in addition to that, I want you to respect me. There! Do you see? Do you see what I'm saying? Pyotr Petrovitch kept laughing to himself as he listened, but without any special enthusiasm. Indeed, he was hardly listening to any of it. He really was thinking about something else, and even Lebeziatnikov finally noticed this. Pyotr Petrovitch was in an undeniable state of agitation, rubbing his hands, thinking and pondering. Later on, Andrei Semyonovitch recalled all this and succeeded in putting two and two together.